Apologize for that. Just want to welcome all the early birds. We'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes, and just stand by and we'll be with you soon. People are still signing in, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes. So thanks so much for your patience. We'll get started in just a minute or two. All right, why don't we get started here? And I am John Mancini. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on on-site versus off-site records digitization strategies. And let me just quickly, so that we don't get caught in an embarrassed fashion in just a minute, check that my panelists are off mute for the moment. Steve, are you off mute?
Yes, sir.
Very good. And John, are you off mute?
Yes, good morning, John.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody. It's really a pleasure to have you all here. I did want to mention that this is part of an ongoing series of educational programs that Quality Associates runs relative to M-19-21. This has been underway now for, gosh, John, I think it's been underway for about 1.5 years now that we've been doing these programs. This particular webinar is in what we call our industry briefs session. There was also a previous one that was focused on COVID and the impact on M-19-21 strategies. And in your follow-up memo after this, you will get a link to that recording. So I hope you enjoy that. We'll be doing other ones in the future as time goes on, particularly as we get closer and closer to the deadlines. There are also, if you go to the QAI website, which is at qualityassociatesinc.com, you'll find links to all sorts of presentations that were done in the series that QAI did with Federal Computer Week, which was a really exciting series. I think we did about 3 or 4 different series. All those videos are available online. They're all free. They don't have any landing pages you have to go through or anything like that to take a look at them. So I hope you'll enjoy that. And I'd also add, just in case anybody has any issues they want to raise with me, is that I do serve on behalf of QAI on the GSA ERM Advisory Council. So any issues that you have relative to the SIN and how that works and all those kinds of issues, particularly tied to M-19-21, route them to me, and I'd be happy to raise them with the council during the next meeting. So with all those preliminaries underway, let me ask my panelists to introduce themselves. And I guess I should start with me. I do some work on behalf of QAI and also a variety of other clients. It's done under the banner of a consulting firm called Content Results, LLC. You can find that on the web as well. And for a million years, I used to run AIM. So that's probably where you might be familiar with my name from the past. So Steve, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, John, and thanks for having me. My name is Stephen Campbell, and I am a lead agricultural marketing specialist in the United States Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Marketing Service in the Warehouse Commodity Management Division. And I've got oversight over our technology modernization portfolio, some budget work, some FOIA work, things like that. And really excited to be on the panel this morning.
And John, why don't you take it away?
Yes, good morning, everyone. John Burgess here from Quality Associates, Inc. I'm one of the senior M-19-21 advisors, as well as a IIM consultant here. And, you know, we've been doing this type of service for over a couple decades. I've been in the industry for about the same amount of time, and happy to get on to this discussion today.
Great. So we're going to do this a little different than you might be used to in the past. I have 2 or 3 slides that I'm going to use to tee up the conversation, but then we are going to go with a radical approach this time. We are going to have a conversation, and we are going to do it in a pretty unscripted kind of way. And so we hope that you'll participate in that conversation, either through the chat or through the question and answer button that's on the module that you have. But we just thought it might be more fun. You know, everybody has been, I think, Zoomed to death and go to webinar to death. To maybe do this in a little bit more informal kind of way. The only bit of formality that we have, which we didn't realize before we all got on the screen, is that we all apparently chose some variety of checked shirts for this affair. So consider this the checked shirt webinar, I guess, if you will. And we didn't intend it, but it looks pretty good, guys. I think we look all right. So I thought I'd start just with a reminder of everybody has seen this slide before, so I won't belabor it, but these are all the deadlines that are out there in terms of M-19-21. A lot of stuff coming down the pike right now, gearing up for the tail end of 2022. It's still uncertain about whether and how the deadlines may or may not be changed. Lawrence Brewer on the last bridge meeting that I participated in basically said that NARA cannot unilaterally change M-19-21. It was a joint initiative with OMB. And so it may change at some point, but it can't be done unilaterally. So I think we're all operating under the assumption that we're going to continue under the current set of guidelines and requirements. And I just thought I'd put this up as a reminder of where this all started and kind of what's upcoming. So I thought I would talk very quickly, and this topic is germane to this, about what I consider to be the elephant in the room when it comes to not only M-19-21, but also to any records management or governance initiative that people deal with. And a lot of people may not know where the phrase elephant in the room came from. And so the phrase actually came from, supposedly, there was a musical on Broadway in 1935, and one of the called Jumbo or Dumbo, and it became a movie later on. And then Jimmy Durante was kind of the star, kid actor in the play. He was one of the stars. And one of the scenes that supposedly brought the house down was that the play featured actually a live elephant that came on stage during the play. And so as the elephant crosses the stage, a cop comes up to Jimmy Durante and says, what are you doing with that elephant now? And he replied, what elephant? And supposedly the elephant in the room came from all of that. So the elephant in the room that I think exists with regards to M-19-21, with regards to records management, with regards to information governance, is how do you build and develop a strategy to deal with the paper in your organization, both the current paper, as well as the past paper, as well as the paper that is going to come. So this failure to address this massive paper legacy, I think, is at the heart of one of the issues that people need to address. And it's also at the heart of, when you think about moving forward, what do you need to do in order to really become an aspect of digital government? How do you actually get rid of paper, drive it out of the business process? And so as I was reflecting on this drive paper out of your business process, which sounds really great, I was reflecting a little bit about my own personal life. And I won't show it to you because it's right over here in the corner, but I happened to open a file cabinet, and I haven't exactly done a good job, despite everything that I talk about in my personal life, of driving paper out of my own personal business processes. You can still see all these things here, purchase receipts and deck receipts and all sorts of things in there. And so my point there is that paper is pervasive. It's hard to get rid of. People rely on it. There's a lot of change management issues associated with it. But unless you start down the path of digitizing that paper in some way, shape, or form, you won't be able to go down the path of digital government, not even to mention complying with the M-19-21 guidelines. The other thing which I thought was kind of humorous to think about is that, we are all in the middle of this crisis right now with regards to COVID and the pandemic. And so, in the midst of all the money we've spent, in the midst of everything that we've done, what have we relied upon to demonstrate to people that you're vaccinated? And so what we've relied upon is this thing. And it just strikes me as so ironic that in an era in which we're talking about digital government, and we're talking about digital business, and we're talking about driving out paper, we're talking about all that kinds of stuff, still we wind up with something that is easy to duplicate. If you have any kind of a scanner, you can make one of these yourself. And that's what we're using as the basis for security and identification moving forward in this very important issue that we have to deal with. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on was a poll that we ran on our last webinar. And again, the idea here is not that paper is the be all and end all, but it's an indicator of problems in organizations. If paper is pervasive, then odds are there are other systemic problems related to automating governance in the organization. And so when we ask this question of how significant is the paper problem, it's still very significant for more than half of the people that participated on the last webinar. And so with that, I thought we would start off with a little bit of a poll tied to this question of on-site versus off-site. And these are always a little risky to do because you never can quite tell what you're going to get. So we will try that right now and see how it goes. So here is the first poll that we'd like you to try. Hold on. And basically, which strategy best describes the most typical way your organization approaches the task of backfile document conversion? So how do you go about this? Do you contract with an outsourcer to do this stuff on site? In other words, have people come into your organization that you contract with? Do you contract with somebody to do it off-site? In other words, you ship the boxes to somebody else and you do it in their facility. Or do you do it yourself? Or do you not do it at all? And so I think the poll should be on the screen. Everybody should be taking it, I hope. So if you could just and I'm getting from the chat that people aren't seeing the poll. So I'm trying to think why that is. I'm also, let's try it one more time.
There we go.
Very good. Yep. I used to call this in my own organization, when you had a user that made a foolish error, I used to call this ID10T error. In other words, idiot error. That was on my part. So take the poll. Again, it's going to be a mixed bag for most organizations, because most organizations have a hybrid environment, but just primarily, how do you go about this kinds of thing? And we had a little bit of a preliminary sense of some of these questions in the registration process, and so I'll share that as well. But give it another 2-3 seconds before we cut it off and share it. All right, so here's the results, and let's chat a little bit about this for just a second, guys. What you see here is that you do have people that contract to do it on site with people. You have also somebody that does it off site, and then lastly, a lot of people doing it themselves. And then I think probably also some people on the sell side of the audience that for whom it wasn't really applicable. So I think the most interesting thing here, and I'd like to get your take on this, is how many people try to do it themselves. And give me your thoughts on that, John, in terms of the relative merits of doing it yourself versus having somebody else do it.
Sure. These are the kind of conversations we have all the time. We've had probably, John, over 100 of these conversations over the last year and a half with people in records management in the federal space. And one of the things that, we determine right away is, or try to help them determine what a plan looks like, whether you're doing it on site or off site. Are you going to contract to have somebody do it or not? One of the things that we first start with is really, what is the size of the project? Because those people that are going to try to take this on themselves, if it's a smaller project, they might be able to do it. But when you get into these larger projects, it's really prohibitive to have some of these folks try to take it on their own, and for a variety of reasons. Some of these projects are complex, and you mentioned paper before. It's not always just paper. It's microfiche, microfilm, audio, video. So the complexity of these projects can also be a determining factor. And what we try to do is really, as a consultant, walk through those different items. How big is the project? How much space do you have? How complex is it? And do you have a deadline? So those are the things that we do to try to help folks determine whether it's something they want to take on themselves or not.
And Steve, just quickly, and then I'm going to turn to another set of questions. What do you do? Just so everybody knows where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, John, we actually did offsite, and we have a handful of reasons for that. Like you said, sort of, and John mentioned the size of the project, the different file groups that we had, some different things that needed to be treated a little bit differently. And we also, we're among those groups that are trying to do more with less, and we don't have the staff that we used to have. I think that's probably a common theme. And, to imagine our staff standing at a multifunction printer, copier, scanner for hundreds of hours with the volume, right? Like, we still have a mission to deliver from my perspective. And so, it became overwhelming almost instantly when we started our conversation with John. So
what I did in kind of preparation for this, I put together I call it just a top 10 list of some of the issues, I think, in terms of thinking through the question of on-site versus off-site digitization. And what I'd like to do is just lightning round this a bit, if you would, is just kind of go through each of those 10 very quickly and have you guys give me, 2 or 3 sentences just in terms of either a reaction or your experience or it's just some thoughts or advice relative to each one of these. And then what I'm going to do after all this is done, I'm going to ask the audience to think about each of those factors and rank them. So you'll have a role to play in that as we get to the end of this. So here's the 10. We're going to kind of bang through these. And I have to warn you guys, if you talk like 5 minutes for each one, then everybody's going to be on this call for like 3 hours. So let's bang through them. Factor one that I see people wrestling with is the time to complete a project. So let's start with Steve and John, and then we'll flip flop them for each question. Steve, why don't you go first?
Yeah, in our case, we were looking at about 2.2 million pages. We had, like I mentioned, no availability of our staff to stand at a scanner and handle that. And with us being out of the office, we had some flexibility on needing to get those documents back. So we did our first pickup in April, and we should be completing delivery here in the next month or so.
Great. John, your point on time.
Sure. So I think time relates to volume. So the volume of the project, the whether it's number of pages or images on fiche, what have you, and then also space. So if there's not enough space on site for the amount of resources and equipment, then it's going to take more time. So time is also a big factor because as we have on our website, we have a countdown till December 31st, and that's coming quicker than we want to think about.
Yeah, the volume one was actually my second factor that I had thought of is that the sheer volume, and I guess maybe I'd add to it like where this stuff is. Maybe that has an impact on how people make their decisions as well. So any specific things that you want to add to this volume question? That's my second factor.
So yeah, that's a good question. Is the content centralized? Is it located without the building? Is the content organized? So we get in scenarios where we're literally going on site and digging out of people's cubicles. COVID has been a challenge and I won't say a blessing, but it's had a pro for the work because a lot of people haven't been on site. So we've been able to go in safely without other people on site. The con has been sometimes we can't get to the content because it's not organized. So an organized collection is a lot easier to deal with and reduces the amount of time. An unorganized collection, there needs to be some prep work, sometimes even prior to us coming on site.
Steve, do you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
There's always more than you think there is.
Hey, you have any guesstimates of percentages, in your experience?
We doubled our estimate twice.
Wow. So that's 4 then.
Yes, there was a lot. We, in our situation, we had high density files, the ones that you kind of crank like a bank vault and move them around, and they are big. There's a lot of paper on those shelves.
Yeah, probably squished down into tiny little footprints.
Exactly, and once you let that breathe, it seems to expand a little bit.
And John, I would add that sometimes, when we look at a collection and start a project, people sometimes come out of the woodwork once they start seeing the results and want to add to it.
Yep. So my third one that I came up with on my list was in terms of pros and cons of on-site versus off-site is how disruptive is your approach to the existing business processes? So maybe Steve, why don't you start with that one?
Yeah, and again, not to borrow John's, COVID was not a blessing, but it did give us a little bit of an opportunity to realize that we didn't actually need our hands on the paper every day. If we would have still been in the office, I know that I would have been fighting with staff and management and like leadership because it was a security blanket. And so we had been out of the office long enough that we realized that we didn't actually have to have it every day. And so it was pretty minimal to our business processes as far as the disruption. And one thing that I would say whenever you do take the offsite route is, especially with QAI, we've got the ability to get a copy of those files back pretty quickly. And I think we've done it about 3 or 4 times, where we've asked for specific files, and the turnaround on that is a day, 2 days tops. And so I think that also speaks to the accessibility of having them. They're not, just because they're not still in the building doesn't mean that they're gone forever until delivery. So if we've got a need for something, we can get it back.
So that's interesting, because that ties to my fourth one that I was going to raise, is whether if you need to have access to stuff, in other words, if this isn't just a bunch of boxes that nobody's looked at for 100 years and you're scanning it, versus stuff that has some active process life associated with it. It sounds to me, Steve, what you're saying is that you can have, it doesn't really make a difference, totally make a difference whether you choose on-site or off-site. You can have access with either approach.
Yeah, and in our case, we did, and we, like I said, we hadn't had the physical connection to the paper for a number of months prior to starting our project. So that was already kind of removed. If we were still in the office, I think I probably would have had a harder fight to get those all off site.
So John, my fifth one I want to ask you is has to do with security of files and documents. And do you ever get resistance from people that somehow think putting boxes on a truck and sending them off site is not something they want to do?
Yeah, we certainly have those conversations. A lot of our discussions start with folks wanting us to come on site to do the digitization. As we walk through the steps about volume, time, security becomes a big part of that discussion. And we walk through the fact that our facilities, our imaging centers are fully secure, related to NACI background checks. All our employees are empowered with that. We always consider the agency's documents theirs. It's their files. They're entrusting us with those files. We have security practices in place, from started with a chain of custody document to using our own transportation. So our own vehicles, our employees. So from start to finish, those files are with us. And again, we consider them to be their files, and they're entrusting us with that. We have our standard operating procedures in place, and our own security officer that works with us on each project to make sure that we're meeting the requirements that the agencies put forth to us.
Steve, how big a deal was security for you guys as you thought through your strategy?
It became less and less important once John kind of walked us through the steps that QAI takes. The biggest point of concern for a lot of my folks was the trip. So we're based here in Kansas City, and so getting all of those back to Maryland, that was the part that really made me kind of nervous, because once everything gets there, it's not a concern, right? But it's 1,100 miles or so. It's there's a lot of room for something to go wrong, and in talking with them, and I hope I don't jinx it, they'd never had an issue with a shipment, never, so it was comforting, and it was nice to have some comfort from the QAI folks, and some assurances there. But we don't have anything top secret. We don't have anything secret. The highest classification we have is some CBI, that some privately held companies wouldn't want their financial statements out on the street, for example, in our space. Other than that, we didn't have a ton of strict security requirements.
Yeah, it strikes me that a lot of this also is a question of relative risk, because I think back to when people used to think that they couldn't move any information to the cloud because it was so much more secure on-prem, and not realizing that their data center, particularly in small and mid-sized organizations, everybody knew that the computer room doubled as a storage room, and everybody knew that it was 9731 on a 9-digit keypad to get into the storage room. So everything is relative. So we do have the question and answer button or the chat. Anybody that wants to chime in with any questions or particular problems that you have. Let's talk about staff training in terms of how did that factor into your decision? Let's start with you, Steve, on that one.
We didn't have a ton as far as training. The only thing that we had was where we actually are taking delivery and moving those into, we're actually using Box as our content layer. So there was some training around Box and, sort of how everything was coming back, but, really robust search features, OCR, obviously in the images, not a lot of hands-on training on my side.
Did you have to do any change management-y kinds of stuff with staff before you started all this?
We did. We socialized it a lot, and reassured everyone that the paper was safe, and nothing was going to be destroyed until we confirmed, the validity of everything and verified everything. Just a lot of fear, quelling and reassurance. Not a bunch in process changes, but just kind of mental. Oh, I can just go to the file to the shelf and grab that file. Well, not exactly. And again, not being in the office for those number of months really kind of helped that too. We were already getting creative on how we got a hold of some of those images or some of that paper.
Yeah, that comes under the John's category. I think that don't waste a good crisis in terms of driving change. John, how about you on the training side? Do you guys do a lot of training with customers, or how does that work?
We really don't when it relates to on-site versus off-site. I did want to say this, John, because I think this is important, and Stephen can probably comment on it. Is when we get a collection in-house, or if we're going to be on-site, we always start a project with a pilot, and I feel like that really gives a comfort level to our client. Stephen, do you mind talking about that? I certainly can share it, but I'd rather the audience hear it from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, working with our project manager at QAI, we went through, I think, a box or two from each segment as we've started, and we've got, I think, 7 or 8 different segments ranging in size from 150 or 200 boxes per segment down to like 6. We've got some old onion skin. John, I think you were perhaps being facetious from 100 years ago, but we do have some really old paper. One of our main programs was started in 1916, and we've got some thoughts from our Office of General Counsel and things like that we've sort of held on to those originals. So it would, it's really good to be able to take that pilot, those examples, and socialize that as well. Again, using that to sort of reassure everyone that it's going to be okay. And, what's it going to look like when it comes back is a question that I get pretty frequently. And I can say, this is here, take a look at this. And so, even as an example, we found, or John's team found some floppy disks that we had. And so, we got the image of the outside of the little sleeve, right? And so, hey, this is exactly what it looks like, and there's some nuance there, and we can get different paper sizes or orientations in front of people. Everyone seems like has a really niche or a unique use case, and it's not that unique at the end of the day, right? So, well, we use legal size paper. Okay, that's not a problem, right? So I think that was really great as far as reassurance and kind of calming the waters.
I'll bet those POCs were a big part in going from that 1x to 4x that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, and getting them all on board to And I think kind of John, the way John said too, they come out of the woodwork. There's stuff at each cubicle, or there's stuff that people have held on to. And that was a factor too, is okay, we need everybody to start putting things back on the shelf so that we can take them off and box them up in an order that makes sense, as opposed to going around, spending half a day rummaging through everybody's cubicles to pick up the files that people have stashed, from a year ago.
All right, my sixth one was available office space, and I think we've already kind of covered that. My seventh one, in terms of factors that people need to think about, is the mindset of senior leadership, and we've already talked about that a little bit in terms of change management. But Steve, what was involved in convincing people to go down this path?
So in my role, I kind of had to manage up and down. Assuring people that it would be better once they actually have access to all of these things again. We probably could have done it without telling anybody, and just been, just at one point, just been like, okay, hey, all of the files are now electronically accessible. And maybe that's something that we should have done. Like I said, nobody was in the office to know that the shelves were empty. But as far as, managing up, knowing that we had a contract vehicle to use, knowing that we had a partner at GPO, knowing that we had, a firm plan. And so it was sort of, and some of that went both ways, right? Knowing that we've got a plan and these guys are professionals, and, that it's not some fly by night kind of an organization. And the level of trust that we were able to have, and I was able to communicate, like I said, both up and down, I think was really helpful.
John, the ninth thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of the issues I hear from people is how do you go about selecting the right hardware and software? And I guess my question to you, John, as somebody who's in the space, is given how much change is going on in the space right now, whether it's on the hardware side, on the software side, on the content management side, how challenging is it for organizations to really know enough to make the right hardware and software decisions themselves?
I think it's extremely difficult, and they don't know what they don't know, which, we've all heard that phrase before. You have things like FADGI 3-star compliant, FADGI 3-star capable. Part of the assessment of what kind of content you have, if someone is planning for us to be on site or do it themselves on site, is us consulting with them on what kind of equipment do you need. Like Stephen mentioned, onion skip. Do you need a flatbed scanner? Those can't go through a document feeder. Do you need a book scanner, right? Do you need an overhead scanner? All those become very important. And then when you're looking at the M-19-21 requirements from NARA, are they FADGI 3-star capable? And what does that mean? And how do you keep them compliant? Just because a scanner is capable doesn't mean it's compliant day in and day out. There's testing that needs to be involved. So all those things are nuances that a lot of agencies are starting to think about. And when we bring it to light, the bells and alarms go off, and concerns, and then some decisions are usually made of which way they want to move forward.
Steve, how did you validate the hardware and software choices that were being used as part of the project? Was this a collaborative process, or how did that work?
So we just got some understanding from QAI, and listening to John talk about all of those things. And I'm one of those people that I know just enough to be dangerous, and I realize that I'm quickly out of my depth, and know that just the fact that they know these things and are cognizant of these things makes offsite such an easy decision for me. And because it's all of those things that I wouldn't have to worry about, or wouldn't have the staff to worry about. All of those nuances.
Yeah. I thought the interesting thing in both of your answers is that the need for some external assistance, given the complexity of the issues, applies really whether you're doing it on site with somebody or off site with somebody. It's that kind of consultative kind of relationship becomes really important when the stakes are so high. So my last one. Oh, go ahead, Steve. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to add, even if you're going to do it yourself, like if unless you're an imaging expert, by nature, then it's really great to have a partner and somebody that you can ask those questions.
Yeah, I used to laugh a lot that, particularly as scanners started showing up at Best Buy and places like that, and this is a little dated, so it's not completely fair, but I would run into people that would somehow think that, they could hire their brother's son who was on vacation from college to come in and do a digitization project in their spare time. And almost always those folks wound up failing, because it's just more complicated than that. So last factor, cost, and perhaps maybe talk a little bit about the different ways of thinking about costs, whether they are explicit external, whether they are assumed internal. Like how should people think about those questions with regards to cost? And John, why don't you go first?
Okay. So it's quite different, right? So when you're going to do digitization project offsite, that content is going to come back to our facility. We're going to have the ability to control the time it takes to do the project and the space. We would have ability to really scale up if needed for larger projects. When you're talking on site, there's a lot of factors that you got to think about. We've talked about a lot of them today: space, resources, etc. But from a cost perspective, what agencies realize is that there is a cost for companies like ourselves to actually have to bring equipment, and it can be, like as we said, very a highly technical equipment on site. It's not necessarily a MFP, a multifunctional device. It could be a book scanner, and those things are difficult to ship and they're costly. But then you're also going to have folks that are coming on site. So, and with that, depending on the location, there's per diem involved. And again, we're not able to control the hours of those folks because they're at somebody else's facility. So there is a factor of cost that certainly changes a lot of agencies' minds, quite frankly, to consider taking it off-site compared to doing it on-site.
Steve, how about you?
I would just take one of the last things that John mentioned, the per diem and the travel, right? If you're in the NCR, that's a little bit more commutable, right? But you're not going to commute from Fulton to Kansas City every day. So obviously you're talking about per diem. Again, you get to that level of volume, and you're going to need all of those folks. Otherwise, you're going to be doing it for 5 years, right? Like you're going to need to operate at a scale that just the per diem will really be impactful in the cost.
So let me switch gears a little bit here. I got a poll, and what I'd like for folks to do, assuming that I know how to do this again, is to think about each of these 10 factors, and in your experience, or just anticipating what this might be like for your organization, if you're not doing a digitization project right now, which are the 3 most important? So you have to vote for 3, and can people actually see these?
I can.
And if people can't see them in the chat, then let me know so I can. All right, responses starting to roll in, and it's not rocket science. What we wanted to do was just kind of get a gut feel for people of which are the most important things that factor into your decisions when you think about this. Give it another 10 seconds, 15. We should have had one of those little Jeopardy, like da na na na, so that we could give just another few seconds. A couple people still voting. Just waiting till the clickers stop. Okay. That looks like most people have chimed in. Let's take a look and see what we got here. So if I'm looking at this, yep, as I would guess. So that's kind of an interesting set of issues, you know, when you kind of look about how people, the factors that people need to wrestle with as they think about this. You know, number one is cost, as you would guess. And they're kind of a cluster of four here that they're almost the same. Cost, security, accessibility, and volume and time are kind of the key issues, I think. So I think for, you know, for folks like QAI, I think that means when you guys think about how you know, how you sell, how you position, how you talk about those things, you need to make sure that you hit those check boxes that people care about. I think if you're an end user organization, then you need to think, make sure you have those items on your checklist to talk about. How about John, Steve, any take on these items that people raised?
Yeah, I think it actually makes the point. You almost said it before. It's not rocket science, right? But there's a lot of complexity in these projects, and if you don't factor them in, they will fail.
I would just say these four being at the top doesn't surprise me. But you need to be really cognizant from an end user perspective how important all of these things are to you. And you know, can you minimize the risk of like accessibility to active files, knowing that you can turn those around in a day or two, right? Yep. And then, you know, just volume obviously is a huge driver of the cost. Security for us wasn't an issue, but all of those being at the top definitely makes sense to me.
So the last thing that I want to talk just quickly about is what kind of an impact has COVID had on and remote work on how you think about this on-site, off-site decision, on how you think about these issues. And I should have said it for the previous question. If you're on the sell side, an attendee, I didn't mean to cut you out of the conversation. Imagine you're reflecting what your typical customers say. So you can answer it as an end user, you know, and participate in the poll. So let me tee up this last one and then we'll chat a little bit about that. So, and actually it's a little bit broader question than I said, is how has COVID impacted your organization's digitization plans and ability to meet the M-19-21 deadlines? And so if you are a sell side person, just think about the different federal government customers that you deal with and how they might respond. And just want to get kind of a yardstick. Maybe we can use this to convince people to extend the deadlines. No, I was kidding, but anyway.
John, this looks like a softball. I think we're going to see a high percentage of one vote here. That's my guess.
I've hung around too many times with political people, John, so I think it probably is a softball.
I would just say I think the underlying reasons for why might be broader than the face of the answer to that question.
Yeah, good point.
It was interesting. Give it another couple seconds, and I'll just share it with everybody. All right, so let me just share that. Everybody can see that. You can see just what John was expecting, that it's kind of the top end of the thing. And interesting, you know, and I think, Steve, it might be reflective in your comment just a second ago. On the last webinar that we did, you know, both the guys that we spoke with, one from GSA and one from the Joint Staff in DOD, said essentially that there was a whole wave of innovation underway in their organizations that would be occurring regardless of whether M-19-21 was going on or not, and whether COVID was going on or not. And you know, in some ways, they viewed it as not necessarily M-19-21 deadlines being determinative, but helping them make the case internally. And so in their case, they were kind of leveraging it to do things that they thought were overdue anyway. Is that ring true with either of you guys?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you and John both said it. Never let a good crisis go to waste. If you are in this space and this is something that's in your portfolio and you're trying to sell the idea of a not insignificant spend, I think leveraging the world around us is it's what we have to do. Certainly, at least in my experience in the federal space. So what I would also say, it underscores how important some of these things are. And really, especially at USDA, we're having conversations all the time about future of work. Yeah. What does it look like? Are we going to be returning to a period of maximum telework? Are we going to see more remote duty stations? And at the end of the day, you need the information that's in those files somehow. And honestly, UPSing them back and forth it's just not sustainable. Yep. And so, we really leverage this to this opportunity to leap forward. Like you said, John, it's not disconnected from the M-19-21 deadlines, but another track of that conversation, especially at least in my experience, it's another unfunded mandate, and it's just something that we're gonna have to do, and now we've actually got a good reason to do it.
Yeah, and they were originally positioned when they explained it in the original documents as a wedge to digital government, a wedge to digitization. So I mean, that was the whole point in the first place. I think sometimes we get lost in a checkbox exercise when the point of it was to modernize government. I interrupted you, John. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add, a byproduct of what has occurred the last couple of years is that a lot of federal agencies have used this time to do some renovation, yep. Some downsizing to get ready for this next, world of work. And part of that is reducing the record space that they're going to have on site. So they've utilized this time to renovate, to move, and as part of that, they've been able to fund the digitization piece of it through that move or relocation or downsizing.
So before we close, and I'll tell the audience, I gave these guys this question in advance, so they had a little chance to think about it, I'd like you to share 2 or 3 insights or pieces of advice that you would give to people as they think about this set of questions, just something to take with them at the end of this call. And John, why don't you go first, and then we'll conclude with Steve.
Okay, so the 3 things that I thought I wanted folks to take away when they're looking at on-site versus off-site is the 3 key factors are space, volume, and time. Those are the 3 components that we start with. Funding is a big factor. So whether you're looking at on-site or off-site, you're going to compare those to determine which one is right for you. And then lastly, if you're concerned about security, make sure whoever you're talking to walks you through their security processes, their standard operating procedures. And then if you can, go visit their imaging center.
That's 4. That's good though. Very good. Steve, how about you?
I would say trust the experts. When John asks these questions, he's not, trying to be mean or, anything, right? Like he's trying to help you understand, the factors that go into the underlying cost. The other thing I would say, and I'll only do 2, so on balance.
We'll average 3.
Absolutely. is make the investment. It on the face, it's a lot, but the amount of money that we're going to save in rent over the next 5 years for the high density file space, it makes a big dent in starting to offset some of the initial costs. So take a longer term view and don't get shocked by the sticker shock. And if that does, play an impact, see what you're flexible on. Maybe you're not as committed to on-site as you thought. One of the things for us, just as another closing thought, is if we're going to do on-site, we have some conference rooms in our basement. But even the time that it would take to move the files from the 5th floor of our building to the basement, and just logistically, all of that just takes so much time. And then if you're going to do that yourself, what are those staff years not doing that they should be doing? And trust the experts and let them handle it.
Well, guys, thank you very much for the time. Appreciate it. And for the audience, thank you for your attention and your engagement in the topic. I really appreciate it. This is a little bit different format in that it was more conversational than PowerPoint. So please let me know what you thought of that and whether it worked for you. My email, if you want to send me a note, is jmancini77@gmail.com. The 77, by the way, is not the year I was born. So, but thank you guys for participating. Thank the audience. And we will be distributing a recording of this, and feel free to disseminate it internally to other folks in your organization. And if they have questions, then please have them asked. So guys, thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.